What are they saying to the vast majority of murder victim family members where the death penalty is not even on the table? Crimes they had nothing to do with and were exonerated and freed. And the fourth, when the state says the death penalty is for victim families, and work to keep them from being executed.
Florida carried out its first final penalty punishment since 2019, when convicted slayer Donald David Dilbeck was ended. It was the first such punishment in Florida since Gary Ray Bowles was put to his end by lethal injection in August 2019 for a slaying in Jacksonville. And it was Florida's 100th such punishment since 1976, when the penalty was reinstated. The final penalty in Florida. The penalty is a highly controversial issue, and Florida is no exception. Florida has a long and complicated history with this punishment, with some of the highest rates of this punishment in the country. As of 2021, Florida has executed over 100 prisoners since the reinstatement of the penalty in 1976. One of the most significant issues with the penalty in Florida is the potential for wrongful convictions. Florida has had several high-profile cases in which individuals were sentenced to their end only to be later exonerated, such as the case of Juan Melendez, who spent 17 years in the row before being released in 2002 after DNA evidence proved his innocence. The risk of executing an innocent person is a grave concern and has led to calls for the abolition of the penalty in Florida and across the country. Another issue with the penalty in Florida is the racial bias that has been found in the application of the punishment. A study conducted by the University of North Carolina found that defendants who ended with white victims were more likely to receive the penalty than those who ended with black or Hispanic victims. This disparity is concerning and suggests that the penalty may be applied unfairly based on race.
What are they saying to the vast majority of murder victim family members where the death penalty is not even on the table? Crimes they had nothing to do with and were exonerated and freed. And the fourth, a murder victim family member who was herself a victim, stabbed in the head and left for dead, saw her father be killed. I'm sorry for your loss, but the fact that you had to wait 32 years to get your closure is actually carried out the last 3 electric chair executions in the state. And she forgave the killer, and she talks about that. And that's not right either. And is a former warden of Florida State Prison. When the state says the death penalty is for victim families, and work to keep them from being executed, forced you to put your healing process on hold. And he talks about the trauma that's being visited on workers in prison. 2 men who survived wrongful conviction and time on death row.
Despite these concerns, Florida continues to use the penalty. In 2019, Florida punished 3 prisoners, and as of 2021, there were over 300 inmates on the row in the state. In recent years, Florida has made changes to its penalty procedures in response to legal challenges. In 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Florida's penalty sentencing process was unconstitutional because it allowed judges, rather than juries, to determine whether to impose the penalty. The state subsequently changed its law to require a unanimous jury decision for a final sentence. There have been ongoing efforts to abolish the penalty in Florida. In 2019, a bill was introduced in the state legislature that would have ended the use of the penalty in Florida and converted all existing demise sentences to life in prison without parole. However, the bill did not pass, and the penalty remains legal in the state. The penalty in Florida remains a contentious issue. While some argue that it serves as a deterrent and a just punishment for the most heinous crimes, others point to the risk of wrongful convictions, racial bias, and the moral and ethical questions surrounding state-sanctioned slaying. As the debate continues, and stories like Donald Dilbeck arise, it is clear that the future of the penalty in Florida and across the country is far from settled. A history of violent crimes. So who was Donald David Dilbeck and what were his crimes? More than 30 years of court proceedings detail a life of crime for Donald Dilbeck, including 2 capital convictions and multiple attempts at escape. The violence was curbed after Dilbeck was placed alone in a cell 6 by 9 by 9.5 feet high on the row following his final 1991 conviction. At age 6, Dilbeck's father walked out on him and his alcoholic mother, and he was placed in several foster homes until age 15. In 1979, Dilbeck was caught trying to steal a car in his native Indiana. He knifed the owner in the chest and ran to Florida. He was charged with attempted slaying while on the lam. Then, in April of that year, 15-year-old Dilbeck is caught sleeping in a stolen car at Estero Beach in Fort Myers, where he fled after the Indiana incident. He testifies he was awoken by a light in his eyes coming from the flashlight of Lee County Deputy Dwight Lynn Hall, 31. Dilbeck exits the vehicle and tries to run. Deputy Hall catches up with him and a tussle ensues. Dilbeck testifies that Deputy Hall said, "I don't want to have to hurt you," which prompted Dilbeck to react by grabbing the deputy's gun from its holster. Deputy Hall is shot in the face and back and destroyed. Dilbeck is caught hiding in the surf a short time later. Dilbeck later enters a negotiated guilty plea of first-degree premeditated slaying and is sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. At some point during his incarceration, he tells investigators that he chose Fort Myers because he once knew someone who vacationed there. Forward to the years between 1979 and 1990, Dilbeck was incarcerated in several correctional institutes throughout Florida, including Sumter Correctional Institution, Zephyrhills Correctional Institution, Avon Park Correctional Institution, and the Quincy Vocational Center. In 1982, Dilbeck tried to escape Zephyrhills Correctional Institution by scaling a wall in front of prison guards. He was charged, and 1 year was added to his 25-year sentence. He tried to escape the institution multiple times during his stint there. In 1990, 11 years after the slaying of Deputy Hall, Dilbeck was transferred to the Quincy Vocational Center for good behavior. Aside from the attempted escapes and a reprimand for being caught with prison contraband, Dilbeck had a clean behavioral record during his incarceration. Several Florida Department of Corrections employees were later fired in connection to his transfer, according to a news report. In June of 1990, Dilbeck and other inmates were helping to cater an event for senior citizens of Gadsden County at Gretna Elementary School when he disappeared. He was reported missing around 8:15 p.m. He walked for 2 days to Tallahassee and bought a paring knife at a Publix grocery store on the way. On June 24, 1990, Dilbeck arrived at the Tallahassee Mall where eyewitnesses, including one of the victim's sons, reportedly saw him leaning against a pillar surveying the parking lot. Eventually, he zeroed in on 45-year-old Faye Lam Van, who was waiting inside her blue Chevy Nova. Van was a Tallahassee mother who had planned a family picnic at a local dog lake and was in her bathing suit and did not want to go inside the store. Her sons went into the Gayfers department store to make a quick return. Dilbeck entered the vehicle and, using the newly purchased knife, ordered Van to drive. Dilbeck later testifies that he began knifing her when she started to fight back. He told a court in 1991 that, "She screamed and then I go up to grab her and get my hair out of her hand, and she wound up biting me and I just go off." Van is knifed more than 20 times. An autopsy later determines that Dilbeck severed her windpipe, causing her to drown in her own blood. Eyewitnesses in the parking lot and shoppers inside Gayfers noticed the struggle inside the Chevy after it hits several other cars in the parking lot. One man with a mobile phone, new technology at the time, calls 911. A second man, Samuel Bradley, who was working as a security guard at Gayfers, chased after Dilbeck, who was covered in blood and running away from the scene. Dilbeck attempted to knife Bradley in the chest, but hit him with the dull side of the knife. Dilbeck was later caught hiding nearby. Bradley was given an award by the city of Tallahassee for his bravery. In 1991, Dilbeck was indicted by a grand jury. He was convicted after a 2-week trial of the first-degree charge, armed robbery and armed burglary. He was sentenced to consecutive life terms on the robbery and burglary charges and, consistent with the jury's 8-4 recommendation, his end on the slaying charge. Dilbeck was incarcerated on Florida's End Row at Florida State Prison in Rayford, outside Stark. In the decades that followed, Dilbeck unsuccessfully challenged his convictions and sentences many times, including 2004, 2007, 2015, 2018, 2020, 2021, and 2023. His final effort was brought to the U.S. Supreme Court, which denied his appeal the day before his sentence was carried out. The appeal was based, in part, on the argument Dilbeck had a mental condition that was equivalent to an intellectual disability. His legal team stated he had an average IQ of 98 to 100, but was diagnosed with a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder called neurodevelopmental disorder associated with prenatal alcohol exposure. Essentially, he suffered since birth from brain damage, which allegedly impaired his decision-making abilities. Court records document testimonial claims by Dilbeck's biological father that Dilbeck's natural mother was an alcoholic who consumed multiple packs of beer every day of her pregnancy. This eventually led his biological father to abandon the family. Dilbeck and his older sister were left in the care of his mother, who allegedly continued to drink excessively. Dilbeck's sister testified in court that their mother was also physically abusive. Dilbeck's mother, according to court records, ended her own life by walking in front of traffic after being released from a mental facility. He was around 4.5 years old and entered the foster care system. He was reported to have been a slow learner, which allegedly prompted rejection from the foster family that adopted his sister. He was later adopted around the age of 6 and raised by an Indiana couple before running away in the 9th grade. The couple later tearfully testified in court in 1991, asking for the judge to spare his life. They eventually moved to Florida to be able to visit Dilbeck in jail regularly. No one from Dilbeck's family, the Lee County Sheriff's Office, or Deputy Hall's family attended his end. Van's daughter, Laura, attended with a family friend. Van's son, Tony, who was inside the mall and saw Dilbeck as he walked inside the store, decided not to attend at the last minute. Donald's last moments. Donald Dilbeck didn't mince words in the minutes before the state carried out his punishment. 59 years old and strapped to a gurney in the Florida State Prison demise chamber, he said, "I know I hurt people when I was young. I really messed up. But I know Ron DeSantis has done a lot worse. He's taken a lot from a lot of people. I speak for all men, women, and children. He's put his foot on our necks." Then, at 6:02 p.m., Florida Department of Corrections workers began to administer the first of 3 drugs to sedate him, paralyze him, and stop his heart. In the minutes after the lethal injection procedure began, Dilbeck, covered with a sheet up to his armpits, clenched his jaw and puffed up his cheeks several times. His chest and left arm twitched. At 6:05 p.m., prison workers tapped his eyelashes and grabbed his shoulders, saying, "Hey, Dilbeck." He didn't react. As 6:06 turned to 6:07, his mouth fell open and his body became still. By 6:10, his face grew ashen. A physician checked his eyes and put a stethoscope to his chest before pronouncing him deceased. He was pronounced deceased 11 minutes after the injection was administered at 6:13 p.m. In the witness gallery, family members of Faye Lam Van, who Dilbeck destroyed in 1990, looked on with stony expressions. They opted not to speak to reporters afterward, but prison system spokeswoman Michelle Glady distributed a written statement from 2 of Van's children. Tony and Laura Van wrote, 11,932 days ago, Donald Dilbeck brutally destroyed our mother. We were robbed of years of memories with her, and it has been very painful ever since. However, the punishment has given us some closure." They added that they were grateful to DeSantis for carrying out the sentence. That's all for today's video. See you next time.